Thank you to my sponsor for this interview, Bennett & Co Financial Services. Since 2006, Bennett & Co have offered sound investment advice to their predominantly small business clients, managing everything from self-managed super funds, estate administration, family trusts and other structures, and individual portfolios. With a focus on direct equities and other ASX-listed products, their personalised approach will help you achieve your long-term investment goals. As long-term clients of Bennett & Co, Barry and I have personal experience of their professionalism and communication and have complete trust in their considered and reliable recommendations. No matter where you live, Bennett & Co Financial Services will always go the extra mile for you.
We are what we are because of what we go through. I think that this is a very true statement, and I believe we all have an innate ability to turn our experiences into either a positive or a negative, depending how we perceive things. As children, we're very influenced by our families, and how we move forward in our life is a direct result of what we learn in those formative years. Jonnie Larmore's childhood was far from ordinary, growing up in a cult known as the Children of God. Statistics tell us that suicide and addiction rates are much higher in groups of people who have grown up in a cult. There are some, however, who, through those traumatic experiences, are able to turn their lives around and excel in their adulthood. Jonnie went from having one of the most traumatic childhoods you can imagine to becoming a member of the most elite tactical police groups in our country. He very kindly shares his incredible story with me.
John, thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to hearing your story. And I want to say thank you very much, because I know it won't be easy for him to go back to what was such a traumatic, or must have been such a traumatic time for you growing up. But let's start at the beginning, because you were born in 1982, I think. Sorry if I'm giving away your age.
No, not at all. I embrace my age.
In Japan.
Yeah.
So tell me about your early years and how you grew up.
Yeah. So I was born February 20, 1982 in a little prefecture called Saganuma in Kawasaki. My parents at that stage had been in the family for some time.
So it was the Children of God, wasn't it? And then
yeah. So the Family Children of God, which is now rebranded as the Family International, still exists in a very like an online capacity. Mm-hmm. So maybe I'll take you back a little bit. So maybe now my father and my mother.
Yeah.
And how we got to Japan. Yeah. So my old man was an American Marine, and he was on the base in the Philippines. My mother was had already joined the family. Both of my parents are American. So my dad's from Pasadena, California. My mother's from Buffalo, New York. And the family started, I think, in 1968, you know, at a time of free love, where I think their initial value system was a good one. You know, they wanted to help people. My mother was an LSD popping hippie. Mm-hmm. She, I think it was a safe place for people to, be born again. They were born again Christians. They marketed themselves as non-denominational, so they weren't tied to one denomination. And it was just about loving people and telling people about the Lord. It takes a turn. Years later, David Berg was an evangelist, affectionately known by all the kids as Grandpa. We told to call him, refer to him as Grandpa. He was an evangelist. His mother was an evangelist, and he ends up shaping the belief system towards some pretty messed up ideologies down the track. So my mother had two kids, my eldest brother, and then another sister who weren't to my father.
This was before she
met my father.
Oh, yeah.
And my second sister is half Filipino, so she was flirty fished. She was a product of flirty fishing, which I'll get into a bit later on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But always known as my full brothers and sisters, even though they're only half by blood. Another sister of mine was born in the Philippines before they moved over to Japan to one of the family homes. So as the family got bigger, they had communes all over the world, the Philippines, Japan. They had this big hub sort of center called Heavenly City. They actually constructed this huge pyramid because, one of the beliefs that we had, the earth was, David Berg or Grandpa didn't believe in evolution. The earth was 6,000 years old. We could only read the King James Version because it was the direct interpretation of Hebrew. So they believed that heaven was in the moon. And I believe, like my heroes growing up were Heaven's Girl and Heaven's Boy, and they even had dimensions with the moon. So anyway, I digress. So they had this huge structure, and it was sort of like a big...
where was that in America?
In Japan. No, that was in Japan. Yeah, that was in Japan. So originally I think they used... so Grandpa, was based out of World Services. So they used Japan as like a bit of a hub for, because that's how they made money outside of doing busking and asking people for money on the streets. They would market. They started a company called Aurora Productions, and they would make music, with Christian ideologies, and they would sell them. And that was some of the work that I would do. Well, every day was selling cassette tapes, videos, and that's how they made an income. Yeah. So I was born in Japan. I always thought, like my parents, I didn't really understand why they separated, but I remember being really upset in this genkan, which is like in these traditional Japanese houses. You'd have like an area like where they put their shoes. There's some traditions that you don't step on, the doorway, or it's like stepping on, one's grandfather's head. So, it's like a sacred sort of area. I remember my father leaving, and I remember crying and being upset, and I didn't really understand it. But as I got older, the leaders in the homes, they would dictate who you hung out with. Like, I didn't really live with my family for a long time. They would move couples, like, no, we don't want you to be with them anymore. It's time to move. So they moved my father on at that stage, and I was quite young.
So he was made to leave.
Yeah. So
is that when they separated?
Yeah. So that was.
So it wasn't even his choice to go.
A lot of stuff was not of your choice. But from a young age, I remember just forming what I remember, years down the track. It was very, very structured environment. You would wake up in the morning at 6 o'clock, reveille. You'd lived in a commune with like 130 people, predominantly kids. And you would have reveille, often one of the uncles, because you didn't call anybody by their names. They were always uncle or auntie, would be like playing a reveille song, to wake everyone up. It was normally like a Christian related song. They made all their own music. You didn't listen to anybody's music, didn't watch TV, you didn't watch movies, anything. It was only trying to listen to, the stuff that the family produced. And then from there it was, you had like communal breakfasts. All the homes were very, very massive. So they were normally really big properties. You would have a huge communal hall where you would have breakfast with food which was provisioned. So part of the witnessing and telling people about Jesus, you would also do provisioning. So you would approach businesses. As an adolescent, I remember I'd carry like this laminated folder, which is like a bit of a history about the family. You would walk up, to a business, and you would just tell them that you're a non-denominational Christian group, and you weren't funded, and your mission is to tell people about the Lord and save souls, and because you were not funded, would they like to donate food? So
how old were you when you were doing that?
Oh, it was from the earliest I can remember. Yeah, earliest I can remember. So often, you would be, I remember like looking at these boxes of Weet-Bix in Australia down the track and seeing like weevils and stuff, but you just brush them off, and it's all you knew. Like years down the track, I remember working on the weekend at Sydney markets, and they would give you like all the leftover fruits and vegetables after a Saturday, and that's where you ate, and you didn't really know any different. So,
Jonnie, just getting back to your mum and dad, so I can imagine why your mum, if she was a vulnerable person taking LSD and whatever else, but how did they get people like your dad? I mean, obviously he loved your mother and they married and he joined, but he was in the Marines and...
Yeah, look, that's always been a tough one for me, and I don't need closure from my dad. I'm very close to my old man, and I see it in his actions now. Like, he makes an effort all the time to got a massive family, to travel around the world, and he didn't have an education after leaving the military, and he, I just think he was just not the smartest dude, and he has had a lot of issues with some of my brothers and sisters and repaired a lot of damage. And I don't need the closure from him. I've had those conversations many years down the track, but many years ago. But he's a patient man. He's a patient father. I'm not half the patient father he is, and I just think really easily manipulated. You know what I mean? So when they were brainwashed again as adults, when you grow up in this environment. As a kid, you don't know any different, and brainwashing is real, even to the point of like years down the track. My sister will call me singing a song, and I will remember something I haven't heard for 30 years, like verbatim. 30, and I'm like, what the fuck? What else is trapped in that brain?
Yeah.
But like a belief system of something maybe you read in the Book of Revelation that you liken up to like current events, and you like have this thought, and you're like, boy. Sort it out. But, I think like he still believes in God. My dad, like I said, I have a good relationship with him now.
So Jonnie, when he was moved on from the commune, was he actually asked to leave the family? Or
No,
was
not at all. So they had big family homes everywhere, right? And they worked it so you were a soldier for Christ. You would literally march, sing songs. Everything was very, very structured. And I'm a very OCD, neat for a straight man, very, very structured, human list taker. And, working in SERT years down the track, made me learn, you need to be flexible, and, you can't be so rigid, but, it's formed part of my lifestyle, and that's the way it was. You would have a very structured routine lifestyle. As far as Dad was concerned, I remember him coming back and visiting portions, and it was quite confusing. But there were many adult men in our family's life. Part of the ideology was, as the belief systems grew, there was horrendous abuses. And I think naturally it attracted some people, that you would go out and you witness and save souls, and, you would attract these people who were abusers and use the belief system to satisfy their own needs, especially a lot of the girls. Like, there was, they promoted the law of love, and they use it under the guise of religion. So Grandpa wrote these Mo letters, and it was pretty much him prophesying. And because you weren't allowed to see his face after a certain stage, they would write these literally like booklets, and he was Mo, as in like Moses David, the self-ordained prophet. And he would prophesy the end of time. So worse than all the physical or the sexual abuses, I reckon the worst thing about growing up in the family was the constant thought that you were going to die. Like, I get goosebumps when I talk about it.
Jonnie, I'm sorry for interrupting, but I can actually relate to that, and I was thinking about this earlier. I remember once I was probably about, 10 or 12 or something, and someone mentioned to me that the world was going to end at a certain point, and I got really scared, and it affected me for a long time. But you grew up, you were told that every day.
Yeah, you don't
Or-
realize it until you're like thinking back. But like George W. Bush Sr. was Antichrist and Bill Clinton was Antichrist. Jesus was coming back in the clouds. Like, you believed it. You didn't know any different. Like, you were the chosen one. You weren't allowed to communicate with the outside world. They called them systemites, though they were part of the system. And unless you were like witnessing and trying to recruit them or saving souls, you did not communicate with them. So you didn't know what happened. You didn't watch documentaries, didn't watch movies. If you wanted to watch a movie, so they had, everything was about control. They controlled all the passports. All the parents had, their passports. Because they didn't work jobs, like later on down the track when you're on Centrelink, like they didn't have the systems in place to sort of regulate where people lived, but they wouldn't let you leave outside the house in big groups of people unless it was to witness or, do witnessing and stuff like that. For you, they had an internal rating system for movies. So I was always joke around with my mates. Now they know that if we're going to do like a general world knowledge game, not to choose Johnny because of the fact that, number one, you didn't have an education. Like, I didn't end up going to a school till year 11. And I was laser focused when I left on just getting an education. Like, they started this homeschooling thing where they would do some Christian sort of learnings, but really during the day you were on the streets. They would put you in a van, a team, they would ship you off somewhere in the city, and your job was to sell literature. They'd have another team that'd ship off to another area of the city. You would busk on the street. They would, sew with sewing machines, outfits. You look like something out of the Von Trapp family. I'll have to get you some photos with sashes, and you would sing Christian songs, And
did you feel different? Like, did you think you were different to the system?
As an adolescent, I think they made you believe that you were special, like you were, you were ordained, by the prophet to be part of something bigger, and everyone else was kidding themselves. They were missing out. They're all gonna go to heaven, and they were gonna burn in internal damnation, and to the point of, I talk about that fear of being, the end of time. Like, we're talking the clouds opening up, God coming back, a rapture, all this sort of stuff. But I would ask Jesus in my heart, like I know the verse, the prayer verbatim every single night before I went to sleep, because I was afraid that I was going to die in my sleep. So I would, dear Jesus, please come into my heart, forgive me for my sins, ask me to love you, help me to love you and others, and tell them about you so they can, know you too. In Jesus' name we pray. Like, I would say it every night. So, and that's another thing, when you would go out, is they would get you to save souls. So it was about, I guess they sort of wanted to collate data about how many people you were saving. So you would go out and literally, as he spoke, if someone didn't want to provide a donation, didn't want to buy a cassette tape or buy a pamphlet, which was printed through this Aurora production, you would ask them if they were interested in asking Jesus in your heart, and you held hands with them. As a kid, I would hold their hands, and I would say, repeat after me, and I would say a prayer, and they would repeat it, and that's all I ever knew. Like, you didn't go to the park like normal kids. You weren't allowed to play sport. Any contact sport was totally, shunned.
So, Johnny, were you confident, or did you have a certain level of confidence doing that, approaching people, or did you?
I remember being nervous still. I remember being nervous. I guess you didn't really have any choice, but I do have memories at different times.
Did you have any bad experiences with people?
Often people would not be interested, and growing up in Japan, doing it young, you would learn little bits of Japanese, and I've sort of skipped forward a bit. I lived in Holland, Belgium for a bit. You try and learn some Dutch and some Flemish. Again, the same thing. You're living in a home, similar structure, waking up, doing, this communal breakfast, and then you do JJT, which is Jesus job time, where you would literally do hard labor for a couple of hours, scrub toilets, bathrooms, and then you would they had a similar structure around, no matter what country you were in. You would have devotions where you would read the Bible, or more specifically, you would like read a Mo letter, and there were prophecies, and then, they were always speaking in tongues. And it was cool if you could speak in tongues. I remember, like, I couldn't speak in tongues, and my brother could speak in tongues really, really well. And I remember going like, damn, I just can't do it. And it's just, you think back, it was just madness. And then from there, that's when they would, during the day, you would ship out and you'd do what you did. Physical activity, they called get out. So if it wasn't constructive, as in like doing labor, they would let you out of the home on the property. Normally you had these big sort of houses and properties, and do some sort of, sort of team game or something like that. But it was not a contact sport. And because they promoted health and wellness, that was another thing through, if you go on YouTube, find any of the Mo letters, you can find any of these videos. They would send them out where it was, it always linked back to the Lord, loving Jesus. They would make these videos actually, and I've watched them as an adult, and they're concerning. It was all about the end time. They would get, at this production company, 20 minutes to go was like one of the songs, and it was all about the Antichrist is coming, and, the music video shows like, these fucking slow moving missiles moving through space, and like, you're going to die. And that's the thing, is like, I wasn't afraid to die as a kid. I remember it's something that I hear people say, oh, I don't want to die. Like, I'm afraid to die. Like, I believed that I was going to heaven and the moon, that I'd been eternally saved. And, it didn't fear me. Like, they would promote these, dying for your faith. Like, you believed it. And, years later, I got taken away, and I remember reading my transcripts, and read back the absolute dribble that you were feeding, Department of Community Services. It was all in defense of, this is what you were taught to believe. You were told to believe this. You were told to say this. If you ever get taken away, they would do stuff like wake you up. So you had this flea bag, right? So on the theme that you're going to get taken away by the Antichrist and the end of the world is nigh, you had to have a bag packed with like just minimal stuff that you could just grab and leave and never go home. And it was called a flea bag because you flee with it. And they would wake you up and put you in a van and drive you for like 45 minutes, and you were escaping. And then they would just tell you it was a rehearsal. Or they would put you in a room and they'd ask you a series of questions. And if you didn't do it properly, like, the beatings were horrendous. You were disciplined for many reasons and by anyone. So aunties, uncles, and, some were narcissistic pricks. I remember this one uncle would like drill holes in his paddle so it could pass through I remember him showing it to me like he was proud, like it would pass through the air quicker. And, or other times you were, you chose your weapon of choice, how do you want it? And it was always, I beat you because I love you. It was always like a God tone. Any of the abuse, even the sexual shit, there was always a God tone. There was a reason for it. It was, it was absolutely
I'm going
great.
to ask you more about the abuse in a minute, but one thing I find astonishing, because at one time there were 10,000 family members spread across the world.
I think actually they said I think they touted up to 30, but who knows, really? Who knows?
So all the properties that these people lived in, these communes, were they owned by the family or were they rented? Or?
No, they were rented. From what I know, they were rented. So how it worked was, you worked, it was like a chain of command. So you literally had like a general of each home. So you could imagine like a massive home. So fast forward a number of years living in Australia as part of the family, they would name these homes something from a prominent feature. So I remember living on Windsor Road in Balcombe Hills on this massive, like, Greek mansion style. Like, back then I remember they were paying like so you think early 90s, $850 a week rent, which would be ridiculous back then.
Mm.
And the way they got that money was from every single adult being on Centrelink. So they would not put where they lived. Everything was always sent to a PO box, and every 4 to 6 weeks they would go and they would check it. So it was harder for the government to really sort of be accountable for where people were living. And then through raising money on the street, busking, and that's how they, so this structure, every single home, let's say around the world in the family, they would tithe. So out of all that money that they earned, even you and your Centrelink parent as an uncle or an auntie, it will get channeled into the one space, and then it would get tied up to World Services. So David Berg sat back there predominantly in Mexico because Interpol was chasing him for ages. And yeah, he was just slapping it up, drinking lots of wine, writing his prophecies, doing his productions and making his cassette tapes. And
even
as his ideologies and his belief system started to twist and turn even more as time went on.
because it started off quite conservatively,
Yeah.
didn't it?
Yeah, when I said, like, my mother, like, when I said she was an LSD pop hippie, she just was a hippie. I think back then, early in the piece, there was a lot of people who were lost, and you look at that time, and it was something new and exciting. And like I said, you had these people like River Phoenix and the Phoenixes, Rose McGowan. Their family, they were just kids at the time. I don't think they were born into it. I think their family joined when they were still toddlers, whereas I was born into it.
You mentioned the Fleetwood, one of the...
Yeah, Jeremy Spencer.
Yeah.
So Fleetwood Mac at its prime, Jeremy Spencer, who's the lead guitarist, he left, and he's still with the family, to my knowledge, to this day. And whilst it's very different, he was a big selling point, because here was someone who's in the limelight, potentially could be a multi-millionaire, forsaking all. So that's what they called it. They would forsake all. There were people who would leave. Like, I've spoke to family members, years down the track of my father's, who they didn't know where they went. They would literally leave everything. They didn't have mobile phones back then. They would have nothing but themselves, and it was being born again. So they would always get a new name, and this is why prosecution has been so hard. Is, as a born again Christian, you've forsaken all, and you're committed your life to Christ. And my dad was Habakkuk, always a biblical name. And then he was Abner, so Uncle Abner. So either Uncle something, Auntie something, or just Auntie, you would refer to them. Never use their name. And and so there were family members for years who were just trying to find where their kids were, and they were young, influence adults who, again, they were brainwashed as well, and they had children, and it was just this cycle of abuse and brainwashing, and you just, you believed it. So I tell a story where I remember being in a park. I think it must have been maybe just before the raids in like 1992. And this kid, I remember speaking to this kid, he was like, you got to realize that you didn't get to go and buy clothes at a shop or anything like that. That was worldly possessions. Like, even the thought of that was shunned. You're chastised because you can't take anything to heaven, right? So he was like, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I said, I want to be a missionary. And I actually genuinely thought it. It's all I knew. And he's like, you want to do what? I said, I want to be a missionary. He's like, what's that? And I was like, I want to travel the world and tell people about Jesus. And he's like, I was like, why? What do you want to do? He's like, I want to play for the Orlando Magic. And I remember like going, heathen. Like I remember thinking as a kid, like almost feeling sorry for them. Like I was in on something that they didn't have. You believed it. It's not till years later where you're like, holy fuck, Like it's all the abuse, the way that we lived our life, our belief system. As time went past and God didn't come back in the clouds at this state, like it's always changed for another reason. But you always had that fear, even to the point of when I did get taken away, like I was like, this is it. The prophecies are true. Grandpa was right.
So when he obviously had dates when things like when the world was meant to end. So what happened? How would he explain when that date passed and nothing had happened?
So he would translate all this information, like I said, through Mo letters. So he would he had artists who would and authors who would scribe his prophecies through doctrine or via cassette tape, and I would listen to it every single night. You can just jump on YouTube and you can hear the drawl of Grandpa's just, what I now know to him just being drunk ramblings. Mm-hmm. And he would have a theme, let's say it was, the end time, where he would just literally for hours, you would listen to him talk about, the government and how they, their twisted mindset, a lot of stuff on the mark of the beast, and in your right hand and your forehead, and how they're going to control us and how we are free and they don't understand us. And even with the sexual connotations, because the belief systems where like he promoted this law of love, where there were, it was free love. And he would translate all this and his prophecies and his dates through, like I said, his Mo letters and his cassettes. So I can't remember exactly what dates were what, but there was always, the time is nigh. It's ending. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Jonnie, we were talking before about the sexual stuff that went on, and you've mentioned about women and children having to undress.
Yeah.
So how do people within that group or within the family, how do they relate to that, to thinking that that's okay?
Yeah. I don't know whether it's just
and not questioning it. There
were people who questioned and eventually were left. And if you questioned, like you were chastised, you were moved. So people were, as an adolescent, because you didn't really live with your family. If you questioned or you wanted education, you were literally moved to like somewhere else. They would have like a teen home in like Macau, or like the recalcitrant juvenile delinquents who were turning away from God. And you did, there was a lot of Bible reading. They'd make you wear these signs, saying, that we like silence restrictions for a big period of times. Please pray for me. I'm on silence restriction. You weren't allowed to talk to anybody. You weren't allowed to open your mouth unless you were reading scripture or speaking to.
For how long? How long would you have?
Oh, look, I'll tell you. When I was in Sydney years down the track, and I'm sort of skipping forward a little bit, but I was. It was after the raids, and I started to realize that shit wasn't really right. And I remember being in a home in Castle Hill in New South Wales and having a fight with one of the other boys and getting reprimanded by one of the uncles, Uncle Tim. And I remember I instinctively told him to shut up, and he belted me, like he bashed me so bad. And there was a few little things that I think they'd seen where I was starting to head away from the Lord. And it was after the raids, and I'll tell you about that properly, but I'd been in and out of sort of like foster care, still going through a court case, where I started to see the way that the real world was, because he'd been so isolated. Started to cheekily listen to music, started to smoke cigarettes. There was a little bit more out there. So they thought I was rebellious, and I remember really clearly Uncle Paul, his name was, and he sat me down I remember in this park, he took me there, and he was the leader of this home. And I think he tried to build a rapport with me, telling me about how he'd turned away from Christ. He actually told me he killed a dude over in South Africa on some dining, as a dining merchant or something.
Do you think
many years ago? I don't know, but, South Africa back then, even now, is, there's some pretty dangerous places. But, and I guess he was trying to build a rapport with me to tell me how he'd also been, had turned away from Christ, and he had this bad side and he had to conform and all this sort of stuff. So they pretty much threatened to excommunicate my parents. So my dad and my stepmother at that stage from their family, unless I'd gone through this, unless I repented, I went through this, reintegration process. So they moved me to this little cottage out the back of Dural, the Dural home. And I remember being put in this big hall, and I remember leaders from different homes. So I would have been 12, maybe. I remember you being on my knees, leaders from different homes, maybe, I don't know, 10, laying hands on me and speaking in tongues and casting the demons out of me. And I remember just pulling my eyes out, like I was the worst person in the world. And, because of my insubordination, they were going to boot my family from this group. And then they moved me to this little cottage with these other, wayward, they called them backsliders. That's it. Backsliders. So heaps of terms that they would use. You say you're backsliding from Christ. Mm. Murmuring was another one. If you ever complained, you were a murmurer. And so I think that for 3 months I lived in this home. Probably longer, but I was on silence restriction probably for about 3 months, and literally you wore a sign. Around you hung a sign, and it said, please pray for me, I'm on silence restriction. And you just...
For 3 months?
Yeah, that's why I talk so much now. So, yeah.
Oh,
and I remember a small family ran this little cottage out the back, and it was me, one other boy, and another girl. And they'd obviously been identified by the leaders in their homes as backsliders, and yeah.
So, Jonnie, do you mind talking a bit about the abuse and what some of the things that happened to you, and maybe what you saw happen to other kids?
Yeah, it was widespread. There was different periods that were worse. My oldest brother, so they promoted this law of love, and it transcended through to through sharing. So women were forced to, if a man wanted to have sex with a woman in the group, they had to. They couldn't deny it, or else they were reprimanded. And back then, there was no contraception. It was shunned. There's always references to the Old Testament. I think was it Ham, where he spilt his seed and God smote him, or you know what I mean? I remember a book in the Old Testament, so it was always shunned. So all of the family had this diverse, multicultural look, some beautiful looking half-caste kids, because, you could imagine all the different countries and all different sharing and flirty fishing. I'll touch flirty fishing on. So flirty fishing was the practice of female. It was prostitution, but with an ideology, an end game where they called them hookers for Christ. Grandpa even wrote a Mo letter called God's Whores. And literally it's this woman, I think, on a cross with her legs spread open and nails in her, and a naked woman illustrated. We can find it easy. And it was about using, he wouldn't have said his body, it was more about the law, the law of love to recruit people into the cult. And they would normally target, rich businessmen who could give money to the cult. So my elder sister's half Filipino. Her father's a senator in the Philippines still.
God.
Yeah, she's only known my dad as her dad. She has met her father, but my oldest brother can tell stories where they're living in Macau, and my mother of a night would just leave, and she was a prostitute in the name of the Lord, and it was for money. It's how they made money, and so they likened. So you look at so Grandpa was a Jew, and he sort of drew a lot of his belief systems from real old ideologies from the Bible. And so, you could have sex at 12 years old. It was happening a lot younger, but that's like the age of a man, at 12. Like my brother was 12. He was a good looking kid, and he was on a sex roster, having sex with like 35-year-old women every single day. 35-year-old women, adult women.
Within the community?
Within the cult. Yeah.
So would those women come to him?
Yeah.
Yeah. To instigate it?
Yeah. But it was predominantly the females he suffered, through abusing men who would take advantage of these kids, and amongst yourselves. Like you didn't know any different. You were surrounded by it. It was taught that, like Grandpa at one stage would have women, they had to make videos where they would, again, you can just jump on the internet and see these girls on like males, and he wanted certain music, and they would have to like slowly undress, and even writes a Mo letter about how they're going to do it. Even to the point of little girls are doing it, they're sending it to him. And it was just all encompassing. It was like God is love, love is God, God is sex. Even at one stage, I remember him promoting, like imagining Jesus, even for the men, even though he was against sodomy, like you were going to hell. Sodomy is sin. Even wrote a Mo letter about imagining, you're making love to Jesus during sex. But all the Mo letters, everything, like I remember reading this doctrine every day, and like the intricate drawings of a woman's vagina, or like the male reproductive system is all about. He writes a Mo letter about masturbation. He writes a Mo letter talking about how he would promote his stepson or his half son's mum to wake him up, like masturbating him as a toddler, like just fucked up shit. And sex, I think for women, they didn't differentiate between like love and sex, and all the girls who would leave later on, they would behave what we'd think is probably really slutty, because they didn't know any different. I think it was this whole meshed, about being cared for and loved. And, most of the girls, or most of the kids who I grew up with, a lot of them are no longer with us, unfortunately. And some are doing well, but a lot of them, most of them,
through suicide.
Yeah, lots of suicide. So many of my friends killed themselves. They became strippers and escorts, because he didn't have an education as well. So
how, like with the little girls, how young were these men having sex?
It was, again, it was when you came to the authorities. So big raids in '92, like they were everywhere. Like there was multiple.
It was a coordinated international.
Yeah, but there were other raids overseas, and I remember years prior, like in France, there were raids, and then it was almost like a general sending out messages where they started to purge. They called it the purge, where they started to start burning a lot of literature.
Mm-hmm.
So all these Mo letters and cassette tapes and stuff, where he's told us to do certain things, or they had to burn, because it was he used the term selah, which is like a biblical terminology for like secret. Everything was secret. He justified that purge because society wouldn't understand us. They'll judge us. They believe sex is sinful, So it was protecting us. It was about protecting the group from, these tyrants who out in the real world. So at a certain age, so the goalpost sort of changed a little bit. He did introduce the charter, which was like a rule book. Oh God, it was early 90s, where it was almost like a general instruction or a standard operation procedure for the group, and age brackets, and women must be this age, and all this sort of stuff. But it didn't stop it. Like, it was still well promoted and
just a haven
and
for pedophiles.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Like, the abuse was so sad. Like, some of the stories are just so sad, and the damage that it caused some people who have not been able to succumb, who've not been able to get past their demons and would succumb to it years down the track. Like, I remember, I've gone to so many funerals, and I'm almost happy for them, that they don't have to feel that pain anymore. The later they got out, the harder it was for them to assimilate into society they knew nothing about. Like, we're talking no communication, no education. They had no sense of self. I was lucky to be living by myself, just laser focused, wanting to get an education. I for so many years I blocked out my childhood. Like, I didn't have a life until I was about 15, and that only lasts for so long. It all started in America. Most of the people in the homes, I had a strong American accent as a kid. Like, I had an American passport, wasn't an Australian passport, but people would ask me in high school, you from America? I'd say yes. And they'd say, oh, where were you born? I was born in Japan. My dad was a Marine. So I'd tell them the truth, but I would never divulge. And it wasn't until 2012, I was actually at one of my sister's wedding. I took my wife and young kids over. I think my daughter was 10 months old. I had a drink with my eldest brother, and because he's 11 years older than me, he was like, his friends were joking, and Jay grew up in a sex cult. And I remember saying to him, do you tell all your mates about the family? And he was like, yeah, don't you? And I was like, nah, I tell obviously my ex-wife knew about it at the time, and my closest friends. But he's like, why not? He said, and I was like, I don't know. I don't know. It was just a moment of reflection. He said, it's not your fault. No, it wasn't your fault. And that's a big point in time where I was like, but no, it wasn't my fault. It was almost like I'm being suppressing like so much who makes you, and because of a shame. But I didn't talk about it from that moment. I just was really comfortable, and people understand you, why you're the person you are. You are, I am a structured, ADHD as fuck. But, again, you find that because you were conforming to, timelines and settings in life, that it suppressed that looseness because you couldn't be expressive. You're always towed into line. You're always disciplined or beaten, and it didn't matter whether they're your parents or not. You were beaten by whoever, and it was always in the Lord's name. It was always conforming to a belief system that they wanted you to believe, and brainwashing is very real. And it takes many, many years to, I guess, unlearn, I guess.
It must be really hard to let go of things like that
that, because it's who you are, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
and to take that into your adulthood, and you know, that's completely understandable how those poor people, you know, your friends have taken their lives because.
Yeah. Look, for me, I guess I always wanted to, I just use it as a big push to be a good dad. Like, I always wanted to be a dad. And I was always surrounded by kids. You know, JJT would be, one of the jobs was sell all the kids. I think at one stage I had like 68 kids at home. You can imagine how many babies. And you wouldn't use disposable nappies, number one, because they're expensive, and two, I don't know, because something they're not sustainable. But I remember, like, one of the jobs was washing cloth nappies and like jamming kids' shit down the steamy sink. That was your job, you know, for an hour and something as a kid. You know, you got your hands dirty. You had to work. You try and take, like, the good things. You know, it makes you resilient for sure.
Yeah.
I didn't find that out till a lot later, but you know, that's probably the biggest thing for me, is I wanted to be a dad. I wanted to get it right. I wanted to be able to give kids an opportunity to just be loved. Like, it's simple as a parent. You don't have to be wealthy. You just got to give kids, just need to feel loved and safe. And I did not feel safe. And
Jonnie, like, with the kids, you said there were 68 kids at one time. Did they kind of try to look out for one another? Like, did you try and protect one another or nurture one another? Or did, you know, if you were abused, did someone say, "You're all right, Jonnie"?
That was life. You know, it wasn't even abuse. You know, they were normal practice. It was happening to everyone. You know, it wasn't like you didn't, in that state, think you were a victim because you didn't know any different.
Yeah.
You know, this is life, and you didn't realize the toll it was taking. And, you know, I've done work now. You know, I've got help, and, you know, if you don't, you know, it's like a volcano. You know, especially in the work that I was in for so long, can't train a bunch of dudes to kill people every day and expect them to be normal, combined with a bunch of unresolved PTSD and trauma. It's going to come to head. And it did, through various behaviors, and I'm happy to talk about it. But I remember when I did get help, I remember having a bunch of questions that I would ask, that I wanted to ask a healthcare professional about my childhood, that I just didn't really understand. And one of them, so we talk about, you know, when you ask the question about looking after each other and feeling safe, it was just life. That's the way it was done. You didn't know any different, and you were so locked off from the rest of the world. You didn't know any different. I remember, and I thought something was wrong with me. I remember as a kid, for years, every now and again, I would just be sitting on a couch or lying on my bed, and everything would slow down. So I would hear, like, everything would be slow, and I would hear this, like, drawl. So I remember old cassette tapes, whenever they got caught, they would emit this, like, sound, like a big, long, drawn-out sound. And I remember hearing this sound and everything going slow, my whole body slowing. And I remember being really, really scared that something fucked up was going on. And I didn't understand it. And I didn't tell anyone because I thought something was wrong with me. I had something wrong with my brain. And I would just wait. And I remember being really scared and then let it pass. In about 5 minutes, it would stop. And then it would happen again, you know, whenever it happened. And after I left the family, it never ever happened again. And I never knew what it was. And I remember telling my ex-wife about it. I remember saying, when I was a kid, this weird thing used to happen. I would be sitting somewhere and everything would be slow. Like, the whole world would be slow, and it scared the fuck out of me. And there's got to be some weird trauma shit. So I asked the psychiatrist, I said, mate, this weird thing. Before I'd even finished, you know, he'd spat it out, you know, this disassociation. He said, that is trauma. You know, you hear these stories where people are involved in these life-changing incidences like a car crash, they're about to smash into something, or they're about to, get shot or something. And then they talk about everything slowing down, fight or flight. This is my little, 10-year-old self, brain that knew that they were in a dangerous space, and it wanted to slow down and protect you. So, but when you have answers like that years down the track, like it makes you, it's like a relief, like, I'm normal. Well, as normal as you can be. Yeah, there's a reason. It's like it answers questions.
Yeah.
Why you felt something like that. So, yeah, but it's good, having answers like that as an adult.
And I guess it's good to get that counselling because you're in a safe space and you can talk about things without the fear of judgment. And
it was hard.
Yeah.
Seeing someone was really hard. Number one, finding someone, well, I sort of was forced to do it initially with some things that happened, but having to pour over all the stuff. And then when I voluntarily got help later on, trying to find somebody that connected to, and it's emotionally, when you go through that stuff, you don't realize, the first few times it is draining. Like you feel like you've just run, a marathon walking out of some of those sessions because you start pulling up stuff that, back then I didn't think I had an issue. I thought I was good. I was fine, that's in the past. But, like I said, it's like a volcano. It'll build and it'll explode, and normally in not a good way.
So, Jonnie, what do you take with you into your adult life from that? How has it shaped you, do you think? You talked about your ADHD before.
Something like that wouldn't be recognised, I didn't actually end up getting diagnosed with ADHD till like 4 years ago, to be honest. One of the best things I ever did. We always joked about it. We knew it. My son was ADHD as fuck. And I would joke around with this pediatrician like, that's me. And, we'd have a bit of a laugh. But, things like, that would have been seen as a disease you could pray over. So you wouldn't go to, unless you were literally about to die, you wouldn't go to hospital. So
that's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
All these babies that were being born, were they born in hospitals or were they born at the commons?
I think both. I was born in a hospital, but they were often home births, and So if you had any sort of injury or illness, it was God was judging you. You were sick for a reason. Why am I sick? I think I know later, really. Grandpa had a couple daughters. Davidito was his son, his half son. I think, so Davidito, Davida, and Techi. And I think he wrote an article on one of them sick, and, it was pretty much like, why is she sick? And it was because, she turned away from God, and she was backsliding and all those things, and it was a way of God, giving her a serious, illness, pretty much. So I remember like sustaining some, what I believe now still to have been like a fractured skull, and they just laid hands and they prayed over you. And I remember just crying and being in so much pain. They would just literally touch the ailment, the part, and they would pray for you.
So the fractured skull, was it a result of an accident? Or
just an accident. Yeah. Just an accident,
yeah. So with the abuse, were you ever seriously injured?
Oh, it depends how serious you think seriously, like bruising, abrasions where breaking of skin, it was just commonplace.
Yeah.
If you, belts were common, or paddles, or, like I said, weapons of choice. There were other things that were just embarrassing, like, didn't realize it now, but, like even at 12, pulling your pants down, bending them over there, like literally you would have to have uncle or aunties, they would literally use their hand or they would use a paddle where they would bend down, but you were exposed. You didn't realize because you just thought it was normal, but looking back, it was really embarrassing. Always like pull your pants down and stuff like that. You're just exposing yourself. So, but that was just normal, you know, writing lines. Like I've already talked about the silence restriction, you know, isolation, hard labor where you're forced to do like hard labor. They were just a consequence of your actions, and it was all relating to, it could be something simple. Like you never swore. If you ever used the Lord's name in vain, like that was a huge no. Like that was blasphemous, you know, worse than a cuss word. But they shaped the way that they wanted you to think, and they did that through repetition. And you know, you still had like you think about now in school, like your little cliques and this and sort of stuff. They would, but it was nothing. You know, you had your different groups of people. So you had your jets, so your junior end time teens were like 11 to 13, and then you had your actual teens. So you always wanted to be teens. I remember they would have like these dance nights. Again, you were only listening to their music, and you know, that you would look forward to, or you'd have these teen camps where you were chosen. You know, you'd go and, you know, they'd hire like a scout facility, and you would have teens from all over Australia, and it would be something, if you likened it to another event, it would be for like a team building event, you know, thing. But this was all like that, but all, you know, based on maybe if they were introducing like a new doctrine, or it was like developing your teens as, you know, future, I guess, you know, that path you're taking as a missionary, as a soldier for Christ. It would be lots of praying, lots of holding hands, speaking in tongues, quoting scripture.
Jonnie, tell me about the raid. So what happened that night of the raid and how that all played out and how you felt. I imagine you must have been absolutely terrified.
Yeah. So May 1992. So I'd been in Australia for, you know, a couple of years at that stage. Because when I was 9, I was living with my mother, and we have a huge family, you know, a large portion with my father, and my mother's had multiple.
So how many siblings?
Oh God, it's just huge. You know, my mother had the 2, you know, eldest and other. My eldest brother has a different father, and my elder sister has a different father, and then 5 of us, and then she's had 3 others. My dad remarried my stepmother in Australia. She had 7 kids in her full marriage. They had 3 more. So it's just huge. It's massive. So I wanted to be with my dad. So when I was 9, me and one of my older sisters, she was 11. She was only biological sister that was part of the raids. So a lot of my family kids chopped and changed, but I was the only one to stay. And then I've got a younger sister who lives in New South Wales. She's been here for a long time, but she came post-raids. So when I was 9, I wanted to live with Dad, and I remember jumping on a KLM flight from Holland. Yeah, I remember bawling when I said goodbye to my mother, because my mother was the firm one of the parents. She was a heavy disciplinarian. My relationship is very different with my mother. I've been in Australia since I was 9, 1991. She's not come here once. So that I mentioned the homes. You were shuffled. You often didn't live with your parents. They shuffled with you. The leaders shuffled you where they thought you should go. And you know, we had these different homes around Sydney. I remember like the Oaks in Hornsby, Rocks at Borkham Hills, Castle Hill, the Willows. I can't remember what suburb it was in. The Maples, again, from like the trees or something. That's what they named the homes. And again, big, large groups of people and, the same mission. I was at the Rocks and that huge Greek mansion, and I was in a caravan with like 6 other kids on this property. And I remember it was about 6 a.m. in the morning. I woke up to this woman. I remember thinking she was an older woman, but she was probably just 30. And she was standing over my bed. I was on this top little bunk bed, and she was like, "Hey, sweetie, can you wake up for me?" And I remember going like, who was this? And I'm like, "Who are you?" I'm probably doing, like, really confused. And she was like, "Oh, just try to pop on some clothes and coming out." I remember thinking, what's going on? And, the first 11 years of my life have always been, that the government is bad. They are going to try and take you away. We're going to train you. So literally I've sat in interview rooms and been disciplined because I didn't answer the questions correctly. I was taught to answer the way that they want me to answer. I was framed to think that the government's going to try and take us. They don't understand our belief systems. They're the devil. They're trying to control us, to take us away. And as I walked out of that caravan, I remember, I could see it like it was, yesterday, like 5 huge Greyhound buses out the front. So there's this huge roundabout at the front of this huge house. And the rumblings, I can hear it like it was yesterday, of these vans. Like, look at that, I get goosebumps. I was like, fuck, this is it. The prophecies are true. They're coming to take us away. And I fucking bawled. I remember just bawling. And, here the government is, DOCS, Department of Community Services, Child Safety, they're here to try and, help you. And in my head, they're the enemy. And I remember saying to them, my parents never said just talk to strangers. And I remember these workers and plainclothes, I imagine they're like child protection investigation unit or whatever they're called back then in New South Wales, were there, and they were just trying to help us. And I remember just bawling and just being so scared. So we were shipped on these buses and we were put into like temporary care, taken to a detention centre initially somewhere in Sydney, and it was all over the media, all over the news throughout Australia, pre-dawn raids and, other interstate as well, but predominantly in New South Wales. And, brainwashing. I remember these teens being on the back and on the back of this bus and literally singing like, we are not afraid to die, for the Lord will take us high, and take us to his, what are the words? Something womb, wings of love, he'll take us home. It's almost like, we're going to die for our faith. We don't care. These kids are 15, and you don't realize when you're doing stuff and you're being abused at a certain age until you, like years down the track when I started having kids and think, fuck, I was 7 when I was going through that or doing that or, being affected by this, it's like, fuck. These kids they were teens, they were the older ones. They're, they were trying to show this, show of faith and a barrister named Chris Walsh, who writes for the Sydney Morning Herald, I'm pretty sure. And now his clients are normally, let's say a prominent bikie or, I know he jumped on the family bandwagon with another barrister who solicited at the time, Craig Murphy, to defend the family. Yep. Like a pro bono thing. So it was an opportunity for him to get on face. Oh, because it's what he does, he gets his face in the limelight. and they were put into temporary care for a while, and from there that started like years of a court case. So I remember having to go and interview. I remember like a panel of people, probably investigators and Department of Community Services. Like you think, the old school huge camera with the tripod, and I remember just bawling.
So you were about 10? 11?
I was 11.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember just bawling, and I got access to some of my transcripts years later, and I remember reading it and being really embarrassed. We're talking typewriter transcripts. And the theme was defending the family, children of God. Like, they weren't abusers, they didn't hurt us, they didn't rape us, and then in brackets, unintelligible sobbing. Like, it was this constant defense of the family, because I'd been trained that you're going to get taken away, you're going to be asked questions, and this is how you're going to answer it. They're not going to understand us, because we teach you about this. They're not going to understand this because we discipline you like this. So they don't need to know, it's our job to keep this from them. And
imagine how traumatic it must have been for you having to take part in all those interviews. But Jonnie, were they trying to break you, do you think, to get the truth out of you? Because
as in the docs.
Sorry, yeah.
As in the docs.
Yeah. Like, were they must have been wanting the truth.
Yeah, but, I've worked for the police for a long time now. I'm not a detective, but you see our child protection investigation unit, like they're trained to deal with kids in a certain way that's empathetic, and they use different strategies to try and draw information on them. At the end of the day, for somebody to be criminally responsible, you still need evidence, and it doesn't help when your victim is, just not forthcoming with information. Yeah. So it's like everything's there. Yeah. But, I know other kids who are on the same page where, again, you've been so trained and so brainwashed to deal with, to talk to authorities, and this is their intent, and this is what they want to do to you. And like I said, everything with all these videos and everything was they're taking you away. They make these videos, like I said, SOS, it was our signal of distress, where it was, again, the mark of the beast. They want to take you away, they're going to plant a chip in your forehead, in your right hand, they're going to control you. But you believed it wholeheartedly. You didn't know any different.
So I wonder if any of the kids, do you know if any of the kids actually told the truth?
Years later, there have been some successful prosecutions, but again, very, very hard. So number one, a lot of the abuses would happen, overseas. So you look at jurisdictional issues, and the other one was identification. Like, if I'm trying to remember a story back to, when I was a kid, I have an uncle so-and-so or an auntie so-and-so. I don't know their real name. No one knew their real names. How do I prove who they were? So litigation and prosecution has been really difficult. They have had a couple successful ones, but it's been really, really hard. And the family have never owned their shit. Grandpa died, I think, in 1994. Berg died in 1994. And his wife, so Maria, they called her Mama Maria, she remarried a fellow named Peter Amsterdam, and she is the leader of the cult. And again, they've never ever owned anything. When approached by any sort of, even the media, they've never acknowledged anything. And yet it's, they'll say, the kids who've grown up trying to seek monetary reward by telling their story or something. But you look at it, it's consistent. thousands of kids who were just abused. And the later they left, the worse it was for them because they had no identity. Like I remember just blocking all out. I would work. I never went to school until the end of year 10. I remember living with a friend and working, pumping petrol at a petrol station, getting Centrelink and wanting to get an education. So I went and put myself through year 11 and 12. And, we talk now, as a dad, I don't know if you ever read Steve Biddulph's books, Raising Boys, the importance of like a mentor in a boy's life outside of his father. I was lucky I had unintentional good mentors where I was surrounded by some good people, and I know I could have gone either way. I know 100%. So many kids who left family late, like they just developed massive addictions. They had no sense of self. They had no education. I at least got to finish in, high school, and there was laser focus on getting a university degree. And then I joined the police in, January 2004. But people who left later, like they really struggled. Like even as it was, like I remember I was a handsome 15-year-old kid who appeared confident, but I had no sense of self. I had no identity. I really was just battling to survive and to find myself in a big bad world,
Jonnie, were you returned to the family?
I was. Yeah, I was. So we went through a period. Yeah, so we went through a period where we had to do socialization, they called it. So the government paid for you to reintegrate into society. So there were sports and activities. So I started playing tennis, jazz ballet. They chose that one, horse riding. So you had to socialize with other people, but still under control of the family, whilst the court case was still going.
Right.
So, but it was, probably when I was about 13 when I started to realize, 12, 13, a couple of my friends had left the group. One of my friends, I looked up to him, he got the school haircut. I remember he got a BMX, he came back and he was telling me how he worked at McDonald's, he hooked up with hot chicks, and I had to leave. He was smoking a cigarette. And I remember at night, like sneaking off the family home and talking to him. He's like, Jonnie, you gotta leave. Like, it's so cool. Like, he develops an ice addiction years down the track. And for years I would try and help him, even, to the point where my ex-wife, I'd take phone calls at like 3 o'clock in the morning where he's, going to kill himself. And there's lots of it. And I'd travel all the way down the coast or interstate to double check on someone. And at one stage, my ex was like, Jonnie, you can't do it. Like, it's not your job. But I think because I was lucky that I left when I did, I felt this intense sort of responsibility to give back and help some of the kids I grew up with. Even to the point where I've done some mentoring with young boys over the last few years, and started at a school because my ex was a teacher, and I kept in touch with a lot of those boys for years. Some of them very, very challenging and hard, especially when you're, like I've gone through a separation last 12 months, your bucket is, though you got nothing left to give, and, you've got these kids on the phone and you're like, fuck, But I did feel like I had this obligation to give back and help. But with some of my friends that I grew up with, I think it was just at a point where they left far too late and they could not handle the demons. And for a few of them, like I went to my last funeral probably about 12 months ago down the coast, one of my friends, and he was such a smart boy. But yeah.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Jonnie,
When you went into temporary care, what was that like? Did you go into someone's
It was
home?
like foster care. No, it was like literally in like a huge centre.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it was a huge centre.
Yeah.
Yeah, with just carers.
Yeah, and I imagine...
Yeah, it was just a really stressful time.
Mm.
Yeah, I was just, are we going back to our home? You know, there was lots of, I just remember being really scared and confused, and I just wanted to go back to my home, you know.
I imagine that they showed you a lot of kindness, and was that more, or not really? Was that...
They were. I did learn the word cunt.
Oh.
I'm going to say it for the first time. This guy said, I'd never heard the word.
Oh.
Well, we were so blocked.
Sheltered.
So sheltered. I remember hearing him say, one of his mates like, you're parting us speaking. He's like, no, I got to deal with these guys. And I remember saying to someone, what is that word? But look, I think from memory, anybody who dealt with us, who worked for the government, New South Wales government, you know, for docs or whether they, you know, were in care, like they were trying to do the right thing. You know, the stories to them, you know, it's weird because when I started being open about my childhood and being comfortable about talking about it, you see the shock on people's faces, and you tell them some of the stories, and you don't actually realize how twisted it was until you articulate it to other people, and then you realize how fucked up and how abusive the environment was that we grew up in.
So how did you get out? Like, you got to 15?
Look, it was my dad and my stepmother sort of started to withdraw from the group. So my dad's father, a few things happened. My dad's father had passed away. And because I remember I told you about passports, they control your passport. You didn't get to travel or visit anybody you wanted. You didn't have control of your money as an adult. He didn't find out his father had died for like 6 weeks because remember the PO box, and he wanted to go over and see his father, his family, and he'd missed the funeral and they wouldn't let him go. So I think that created a bit of tension, and at one stage they shipped him off to one of those camps. My dad is a teen shepherd. So he was a teen shepherd. So, you know, you think about, you know, the biblical terminology of a shepherd, you know, with your sheep, the disciples. These teens in these homes were recalcitrant, juvenile delinquents who, you know, turned away from God. So he went as one of their teen shepherds. So sort of as like one of the supervisors. So a few of those things were happening. They'd sort of withdrawn. We lived in Melbourne for a bit in a family home down to Tassie. They were still tithing, but I was still not going to school. But they still had a slight connection to the family through that. And it was then up to Cairns, and then for a short period of time, and I stayed there. I'd left at 15. And they went down to New South Wales. My stepmother had some family down in New South Wales, and I stayed. And, you know, the interest in tennis through socialization, like I started playing a lot of tennis in the morning, a couple hours in the morning after school. You know, like I said about those intentional mentors, you know, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. I got to meet some really good people. And whilst I was, you know, living with a friend, or I also lived with my manager. I worked at a petrol station, pumping petrol. My manager and my husband, they were just really good people, and they kind of like took me in, you know. And to this day, I still catch up with her. She's an amazing human, and always very grateful, you know, that I just had some really good people in my life when, you know, I was just in the world.
It just must have been overwhelming to integrate into society after how you lived. And what was school like when you did get there?
School, it was really tough. I found with English I was okay, but with certain comprehension, with like maths and stuff, like I really struggled.
It's amazing.
I was good at my times tables because I learnt these songs, like these Christian songs. 3 times 3 is 9, be loving, good and kind. 3 times 4 is 12, don't put in a base up. 3 times 5 is 15, it's so good to keep clean. I learned them through like a Christian song, like through a song in the family. Learned so I can help my kids. Sometimes helps like that. But some of the others, like other subjects, again, world knowledge is horrendous. But I said laser focused on getting education. For years, I would listen or read. I would give myself one audio book in the car where I could enjoy it, and then one learning book like a Bill Bryson, a short history of everything, where I wanted to learn about life, because for me, the Bible was everything. This is, like I've already told you about, the earth was 6,000 years old. Evolution does not exist. I remember they made a song about Charles Darwin. Does Charlie make a monkey out of you? Do you think you should be living in a zoo? Don't you know that it's a lie? When it comes, you'll turn to die. You'll find out you're not a monkey, but a fool. Evolution was wrong. They've had you all fooled. God created the earth in 6 days. On the seventh day, rested, in his image. Adam and Eve, all that. I believed it wholeheartedly. And that was, even to the point of, if you wanted to watch a movie, you think about, movies like Jesus of Nazareth and all those ones are fine. But if you wanted to watch like another movie, I always tell the story about Pinocchio because everyone's seen Pinocchio, right? They would chop out. They had an internal rating system. So you have your general rating system through whatever governing body. They would have their own, and it would come with like a handbook. And you'd have a movie night. You had to memorize a chapter of the Bible if you wanted to, and you had to have it verbatim, or else there were consequences. We're talking like, you look at like a book of Judges, it's like 26 verses, verbatim. And they would chop out little portions of the movie, which were not of the Lord. And remember back to the old VHS tape. So it would be facilitated by an auntie or an uncle, and they would have this sort of handbook with the movie. And then all of a sudden you'd see on the screen, they must have like a cue to say pause. It would say like powwow, like American Indian powwow. And that's when Grandpa would like talk about the movie and how it related to the Lord. So again, Pinocchio, they chopped out the bit where he gets turned evil, where he goes evil and the big ears and stuff because it was too scary. But he would talk about, lying, and then he would reference, so the auntie would literally say, okay, Grandpa speaks about, with lying, James 7 verse 12 says that blah, 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 blah. We need to make sure that we're constantly telling the truth, or else blah, blah, blah. And it's, in the book of, Revelations, it says, God will smite us and blah, blah, all that sort of shit. So then they would like play, and then you watch the movie, and then powwow, pause. So, yeah. So
what does the family look like now?
The Family International is an online business that say that they do missionary work around the world. Who knows? I think like the government did smash them, with raids, and, a lot's come out in the media around the world about the incessant abuses. But I think they still exist. It would be harder nowadays to run an organization like they did in the confines that they, and then the environment that they set these big homes, and not come to the attention of authorities more, obviously.
And I think possibly as your kids have grown up and become open to talking about what happened, and that must help, prevent people from going into cults. And
I think in the States, it's something that, you see these docos that pop up on Netflix, and when people talk about it, it's exactly that. I think they still, are your preppers. And I think, with some potential litigation processes, the FBI way back when, like, I think in the 70s even they came to the head. I think back then, because it was a religious organization, they couldn't touch it like other cults. But, nowadays, at the end of the day, abuse is abuse. And there are, I've kept in touch with a few of my mates who are doing well. And I have been contacted by a couple uncles and aunties in the family who still have like a belief system, and I've been very honest with them and got into arguments. I'm like, mate, you're kidding yourself. And it's pretty much, they've never taken ownership of the decisions that they made. I wasn't aware of that happening. I remember screenshotting just some of the Mo letters and sending it. I'm like, have a look at this. You tell me if this content, if these publications are suitable for, children, for anybody, to be exposed to these behaviors. Yeah. No, so.
I guess, in their own minds, they have to justify how they've lived their lives. And
I've tried to think that again with my father. I love the man. He's a good man, and I've seen it through his actions. What he's tried to do, for my family over the past, 25 years. I've had some difficult conversations with him. My mother, though, she never owned the shit. Never ever once apologized to me.
Is she still part of it?
No. No, I saw her recently when I took the kids over to America. She's old. And, all it would have taken, I think, to have a relationship with her was to just say, I'm so sorry. I fucked up. As parents, we'll fuck up. Not like that, we won't. You hope not. But we'll make mistakes. And, we've got to own it, if she did that, she would have a relationship with a lot of my brothers and sisters. I try and be objective and think, like her father was an alcoholic, or, and she was also brainwashed. And, so they were forced to be in an environment like this. And as a result, but there's only so much you can do. People lost kids. They did, they would excommunicate different adults and they would move their kids. And again, because you're part of an organization, there are parents who haven't seen their kids for years who would actually go through legal processes, try and get access to kids. Or let's say a separation between parents where one would withhold of the kids. And, so I've heard, that people were too fearful to leave because of the kids and stuff like that. But I think it comes to a point where there were other people who left the group, who took their kids. Again, the Phoenixes. And they took their kids and left. It's pretty simple. That content, that exposure, that abuse is just so unhealthy for children. And, we've seen firsthand the results of the years of abuse on so many now adults, and what it's done for their mental health. And it's just really sad.
So, Jonnie, what did you study at uni?
I did criminology, useless degree.
But do you think you were drawn to that because of what you'd been through?
I don't know. My father was in the military, but he never wanted us to. He never wanted me to join the army or anything like that. In hindsight, I might have had a crack, but I don't know. Maybe I just wanted to help people. I always thought I wanted to work with kids when I first joined the police. No, I don't think I'd have the patience, to be honest. But, I remember in high school talking about it with my biology teacher, about what I wanted to do. And I did mention the police. But I had no real idea back then, the avenues you can take in the organisation. I was laser focused on getting into the feds, actually. Didn't get in when I was 19, didn't have enough life experience, and I remember being pretty bummed. But, when I was 19.
So let's talk about SERT. So SERT is a Special Emergency Response Team, which you are not part of anymore, but you were. And it's one of the most secretive police organisations in Australia, and it's the equivalent of a SWAT team, isn't it?
Oh, look, your typical SWAT unit. So in America, they'll have part-time units, counties. In Australia and New Zealand, we operate very differently. You have a police tactical group. So SWAT teams don't hold a counter-terrorist charter. They might be like LAPD SWAT. They are domestic, high-risk sort of stuff. They don't hold a counter-terrorist charter. So SERT is part of the police tactical group. So you've got your tactical operations in New South Wales, the special operations group in Victoria, SERT in Queensland, TRG in Western Australia, etc., etc. And they each hold the domestic charter for high risk incidences beyond the capability of normal police. But also they're federally funded because they hold the CT charter as well. They'll be the first point of call for something with terrorist undertone. So you can draw on, they work on the same doctrine. So, they're all on the same page. You work together, you train together, and I can talk about it because, my involvement, obviously, because I'm not there anymore. Other than that, it's, there's not too much I can say about, like I won't say anything about methodologies or anything like that, but, they work together. So any sort of big event, Olympic Games, Comms Games, G20s, they'll culminate together and, to provide that specialist capability. So I did SERT selection in 2006, extremely difficult. It takes the best part of maybe a year, different phases to get in. And it was an amazing experience. I was 24 when I did selection. I got into a lot of trouble.
Are you able to talk a little bit about what that selection process looks like?
I won't go into too much details, but there are different phases that look at testing applicants to find certain behavioural indicators. So certain traits that are going to allow you to perform in a high-performance team. And, the physical stuff is hard, but that's the easy part. So it's through a series of arduous testing process over time and courses, it wants to identify how you think, you react under pressure, you react under stress, any phobias, your values as a person. It's really important. It doesn't matter if you've got all the skills in the world. If you can't function and adapt in a team environment, you're no good to anybody. So, it's about finding certain attributes, some of these indicators of a human that are going to be able to perform a role when all shits hit the fan, and SERT are the last point of call if they don't get it right. Tough duties.
Jonnie, through that process that you go through, do you think it's more not so much what they're getting to do, but looking for people who will quit when the going gets tough, or who?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one part of it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to find an applicant who, when you're tired and you're hungry and you haven't slept for days, is going to still drive, the team forward when you've got nothing left physically, that they're still going to get this team through whatever objective it is you're trying to achieve. And you find people with resilience, and there's no doubt in my mind that my childhood played a part. And there are many people with lots of resilience who aren't brought up in a traumatic setting there, but 100% it would have played a big portion where, it forces you to make it through just really shitty times.
And I guess the training is pretty constant, just to keep your skills on track.
Yeah, absolutely. Whilst, all the PDGs are busy domestically, there's also a certain level of skills that you must maintain to be able to perform that role. And it is, outside of doing operational deployments, you will, I was in a black team, so I was a soldier for like 7 years, and then in a green team as a sniper for 4 or 5, and then I finished off my 16-year SERT career in a black team, and my specialist capability was explosive breaching, and that skill set took me around the world, to courses over in the States, and, provided me a lot of opportunities. Something that I was really interested in. And, but yeah, there's various skill sets that you must maintain to a very high standard, and you'll only do that through repetition and through lots of training.
So, Jonnie, what's a black team? What's a green team?
Like in a soldier. Think about blacks and others and green.
Okay.
Yeah. So, whilst all the operators will have skill sets across the board, you also have, you'll be embedded in a specific team for a certain role. Yeah. But there's other specialist skill sets as well. Med teams like medics, lots of other capabilities I won't go into, but it's, you've got to do a lot of training to maintain your skills.
I was privileged to be in a lot of your company a few weeks ago, and what struck me was that within your whole, that group of men who you've been part of their team, how much you really love each other and you care about one another. And, one of your boys was telling me about one of the other men who drives over, gets up on a Saturday morning to go and watch his kids play soccer, and how much that means to him. And a number of you that I spoke to all said, I would take a bullet for him. And it's not like me saying I would take a bullet for my friend.
No.
Because I'm unlikely to come across that situation, whereas you guys come across that situation, well, potentially every day.
Yeah.
So I know you mean it.
Yeah, I've been in multiple situations where you get shot at, and, unfortunately, lives have to be taken. It's putting yourself in an environment where you have to have the utmost trust in the people around you. And when you selection identifies certain traits, will always, doesn't matter where you work, you'll always have your deadbeat, in a unit, or someone who absolutely cracks. But, even if they're a bit of a knob, they become your wanker, you know what I mean? Like the ownership. The majority of the operators in those units, they have just good traits, and then normally just good blokes as well. And when you're literally putting your life on your line, you would take a bullet for any of them. There is a love. It's hard to describe, but they're your brothers in arms. I did 16 years there. I still get passionate about it. I still miss it every day. I made the choice to push for a leadership position. I did relieve as a team leader there for a long time. But it is a specialised role, and people don't leave. I wanted to get promoted, so I took a promotion out 12 months ago. But I do miss the boys every day, and I miss the role. I miss drive humans who just want to get the job done, who can make decisions under pressure, that you can rely on. It was such a big part of me from a young boy or 24-year-old who used to, and I changed too. I was still figuring the world out and had dealt with a lot of my stuff and used to get in a lot of trouble. Lots of ego and lots of unresolved trauma. Will do that, but which caused the bosses some headaches for sure. But, and they're trying to be kill people every day, And, I just get on the piss and make terrible decisions. But, that was a long time ago. But more good than bad to ever come from my career. I was lucky to work with some of the greatest humans that you'll ever meet. They encompass certain values that you just don't see very often. And it's a love that it's hard to describe. Yeah, it's really hard to put into words, but you can see it, you can feel it. It's just such a big part of my life. And someone said to me, I talk about it, I'm obviously passionate. It sounds like you can't let go. I was SERT. I made the choice to leave. You still live in that place 100%. It's not like I can't let go, but I acknowledge that place formed such a big part of my adult life to help shape me into the man I am today. Not only in my professional life, but also in my personal life. It is who I am to the core. I love those boys. I absolutely love them. I'm happy to see the side of it. It's a family. It's a family, like just a family where maybe you feel like for a large part of your life you didn't have one.
A better family than you had to start.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it was just such a privilege to witness all that as an outsider. And as you said before, not just witnessing it, you feel like, oh my gosh, it was incredible. And I was so privileged to be part of that, because one night it was just incredible. So,
they're good guys.
Yeah.
No, I do make sure that I touch base with them, every now and again. It fills my bucket.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know I could go back and drop that, but I need to stay the course and maybe one day get back. One level better.
Yeah.
I'd love to be a good leader for the boys.
Jonnie, everything that you've been through in your life, when you go through other tough things, it must help a little bit. You must have a tremendous amount of resilience.
Yeah, it's funny. I often think that going through a separation is linked up really hard. And I think back to myself, like going, you beat your boat, where it's like, why is this affecting you so much? I think it happens in the background with different things in your life where it definitely does, provide this platform of resilience, but also, trauma is, relative to your past and present experiences. You relate stuff unknowingly to, abandonment, or, there's things that are linked deeply embedded with your childhood that'll happen as an adult trauma. So I think it just depends really, but overall, for sure, definitely, it puts you in good stead to attack life, the life challenges.
But it doesn't make you immune to those difficult times either.
No, not at all.
But
I think it just depends also.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but
Jonnie, thank you. I'm so grateful to you, and I know how hard it must be to relive all those experiences.
I'm more than happy to talk about it. When I have talked about it in the past, people say it's if I get emotional, it's just because it was it's still part of who you were and dig down. But I've done the work. I'm okay. With that sort of stuff. But I feel totally comfortable talking about. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. And I know that your honesty is going to help a lot of people, so thank you.
Hopefully.
think
I do.
Thanks, Jonnie.
I appreciate it.
Thank you for watching and listening to my interview. If you'd like to hear more inspiring stories, subscribe to my YouTube channel or my podcast and follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Life Journey TV.